so, but I believe I have an opportunity to preach coming up, and so I'll probably get that opportunity to finish up. So, going to start 31 on my phone. So, we start 31. We'll go back and forth between the ESV and the New King James to help us understand this based upon some of the words. We get to Proverbs 30. What we're getting to is we're getting to the conclusion of the book. And so we looked at a lot of things, the same things over and over again, reiterated, restated in different ways. We understand that wisdom equals righteousness and foolishness equals unrighteousness. Wisdom aligns with God, and a fool doesn't, right? And so when you think about those things, that's really been the theme of the book, especially since we got to chapter 10 through where we are now. When you get to chapter 30, the first 6 verses here, the words of Agar, the son of Jacob, his utterance, this man declares to Ithiel, and Ukal, surely I am more stupid than any man, and do not have the understanding of a man. When you look at the 6 verses and look at different commentators, what they state here, the question is whether Solomon wrote this, whether it was another man, or whether Solomon was alluding to another man, or whether he was alluding to himself. And so I'm going to encourage you to study that some more on your own. I'm going to continue to keep studying this out. I'm going to read this in the ESV, the words of Agar, son of Jacob, the oracle. The man declared, I am weary, O God, I am weary, O God, and worn out. And so if you get rid of the names and put a meaning, like the ESV does, and as we look through the book, we understand there's some verses that are far better translated for our English in the ESV, although I really like the New King James for most of my study. And so if you look at this, when you look at the end, then instead of the names, we say, I am weary, O God, and worn out. We look at that, and you think about that. Solomon was writing to who? Writing to his son. And what was he trying to do? What was the purpose of Solomon's writing? Lots of little ways to sum this up. What would be the purpose of Proverbs? You all know the purpose.
To give warning, prepare others.
Others, specifically his
Son.
son. So you think about that. And so you look at Solomon's life, and you ask the time frame when he wrote this. Solomon lived a long life, right? And so he had made some mistakes in his life. And so what Solomon says, son, I'm tired. And some of the things that Solomon did, I believe, gave him undue or unneeded weariness. Would you agree? Okay. So I think the ESV helps us understand this. I believe this is Solomon writing to his son saying, don't necessarily be a follower of me in everything. Do better. And that's a common theme for most parents, that we want our children to do as good as we did, but excel far beyond, right? Would we agree with that? Okay. So we come to verses 2 through 6 as we keep reading this. Surely I am more stupid than any man, and do not have the understanding of a man, neither learn wisdom nor have knowledge of the Holy One, who has ascended in heaven and descended, who has gathered the wind in his fists, who has bound the waters. Let me go back and read this differently. Starting verse 4. Who, we need to emphasize that, who has ascended into heaven or descended? What's the answer? No one but. Jesus ain't come yet. No one but. No one does this, right? We go to this next phrase. Who has gathered the wind in his fist? Well, God, right, in his power. Who has bound the waters in a garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name? And what is his son's name? You know. Every word of God is pure. He is a shield to those who put their trust in him. And do not add to his words, lest he rebuke you, and you be found a liar. And so you look at this, putting a farewell on the book, the ending. And when you get to verse 7 through the end of the chapter here, then Solomon is going to use a lot of numbers. And all these, this is going to be figurative language, and he's using it for emphasis. And so we're going to look at verses 7 through 9. He says, 2 things I request of you, deprive me not before I die. Remove falsehood and lies from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food allotted to me, lest I be full and deny you, and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of God. So we look at these, and we see that the theme of these verses points back to Solomon, right? Solomon says, let this happen while I'm still alive. How did he say that? Before I die. So he's saying there's some last things that I want to do before I die. And so when you look at that, what are the 2 requests? We look at this. He said, remove falsehood and lies far away from me. Falsehood and lies. And so, still got a guy working. Work late tonight. Okay. It said, remove falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food allotted to me. What's he talking about? He wants balance. Contentment. And that's something that if we were studying the book of Ecclesiastes, we'd understand Solomon struggled with contentment, didn't he? Right? What's the book of Song of Solomon all about? Anybody know? About his who? First wife. And so he's remorsing Song of Solomon about the relationship he had and how he messed that up 699 other times. Right? Think about that. Okay? And so Solomon is talking about contentment here. Feed me with the food allotted to me. He said, don't let me be hungry. I don't need to be overfilled. Just contentment. He said, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I do what? Lest I'm deprived and I can cause this to you. Right? The law of parsimony is something that Curtis Cage, when he was teacher, before he passed away, that I got the opportunity to study. He talked about the law of parsimony. And he talked about that a lot. When we see God's laws, we understand the law of parsimony. It's a natural law of science. And it's the idea of nothing too far and nothing less. Right? Where everything's just right. You think about our rivers, and we understand we have flooding at some times, but the ocean never overflows, does it? We run just enough water into them and take just enough out that's just right. That's a simple way of thinking about the law of parsimony. And the same thing here. What Solomon says is contentment is the right amount. We could desire more, we could have less, but where I'm at, I'm okay with the law of parsimony. And we understand, as I've said before, that's something that's obviously Solomon struggled with. And that may be his biggest weakness, right? Is contentment. And when you look at his lifestyle, I think that may be a good way to sum it up. So, we come to verse 10. We got any questions or comments? I'm trying to get through this without rushing through, but our time's going to rapidly come to an end. He said, do not malign a servant to his master, lest he curse you and be found guilty. Let me go. I'm going to read this one in the ESV. It says, do not slander a servant to his master, lest he curse you and you be held guilty. And last week, one of the things we kind of finished up with, we talked a little bit about the master and slave relationship, right? And I know a lot of times we hear the phrase slavery, then we balk at that. But really, what it was yes, I own that individual, but that also means not only do I own them, but I'm also responsible, right? Who owns your children? Huh? Who gave them to you? God. And at a point when they reach age, not the age of accountability, but accountable age when they can go out in the world. And if we've done our job and trained them to be adults, they can lead, right? They're still our children, but they're their own, right? They become responsible for themselves. They're not under the care of the household or the authority of the household the same way. But they're ours. And so I would like to argue with anybody that says I don't own my children, right? And I think you might do it the same way. So, because you own your children, do you mistreat them? Not supposed to. Okay. We should. We're responsible for them. Right? And that goes back to the principle of stewardship. I'm not trying to get off point or off topic, but the idea is that when the Jews would own somebody, they were stewards over that person that God gave them. And how does God feel about the unfaithful steward? Consequences, right? Okay, so keep that in mind. We need to keep moving. All right, verse 11 through 14. It says there's a generation that curses his father and does not bless his mother. There's a generation that is pure in its own eyes, yet is not washed from its filthiness. There's a generation, oh, how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up. There's a generation whose teeth are like swords, and whose fangs are like knives to devour the poor from off the earth, and the needy from among men. It's interesting, because when we read these section of Scripture, these couple verses, how many of these illustrations that Solomon gives reminds us of society today? Any? Some of you are shaking your head. Solomon told us in the book of Ecclesiastes that there's nothing new under the sun. What's changed? We're still people. Right? And as long as we're people, we have people problems, don't we? And so you see the cycle of the judges. And so he says there's a generation that doesn't care about their parents. Paul wrote about that in Romans, didn't he? Romans chapter 1. There's a generation that's pure in his own eyes. Right? The book of Judges, every man did that which was what? Right in his own eyes. Okay? There's a generation that's lofty in their own eyes. Look at our world today. We've learned about evolution, false theory. But we have, some people say, we've arrived, right? But we missed it. Okay? There's a generation whose teeth are like swords. Think about, we got the political debates going on, right? And I'm afraid that probably neither party is behaving in a Christian manner right now, right? You agree? All right. Any questions or comments? We come to verse 15. And this connects to 15 and 16, but the leech has two daughters, give and give. What does the leech do? Well, it sucks blood. Right? And so the two daughters are what? Give me and give me. Right? And so some translations say horse leech. That's okay. You can use that. We understand what we're talking about, a leech. And so what are they going to do? What do leeches do to their host? Are they a benefit?
Parasite.
Okay. So think about it in that way. There are these three things that are never satisfied. Four, never say enough. The grave, the barren womb, the earth that is not satisfied with water, and the fire never says enough. What's the analogy here? Is the leech ever full? They will drink until, think about a tick, similar animal, isn't it? They will drink until they what? They burst enough. And is it enough? Fire burns until what? Everything's destroyed or consumed. And so we're talking about an attitude. There's some people, nothing's going to be enough until they utterly destroy something. Verse 17 says, the eye that mocks his father and scorns obedience to his mother. The ravens of the valley will pick it out, and the young eagles will eat it. And so the eyes that mocks his father they look down at what? Obedience to their mother. And so when we think about the ravens of the valley, what do ravens do? We've got an epidemic of these black vultures. What do they do?
Ravens be like crows, like scavengers.
Okay. And they're looking for something free and easy prey. And the young eagles will eat it. The ravens here, what we're talking about, is the type of bird that will cause something to die. And then the young eagles will then come along and do what? They'll come along and eat it. Right? So we're talking about, just like we talked before about the fire that burns, the things that are never satisfied until destruction comes, until they can prey upon the situation. And so Solomon's warning his son that this is the way some of the world works, right? The fools, the ungodly. It's not a godly way. So we come to verses 18 and 19. There are three things which are too wonderful for me, yes, four which I do not understand. Have you seen the theme? There's three, no, there's four. There's three, no, there's four. We see the figurative language here. The way of an eagle in the air, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship in the midst of the sea, and the way of a man with a virgin. So you have three analogies really connected to probably the subject or the theme. And so you can look at verse 20, and then we'll go back to talk about 18 and 19. This is the way of an adulterous woman. She eats and wipes her mouth and says, I have done what? No wickedness. Okay. And what she says is, there's nothing been wrong. There's no trail left behind. And that's important when we go back and we think about that. It says the way of an eagle in the air. Right? Today we have airplanes, and we can look. What's that thing in the sky called? Behind an airplane. Jet stream. You can look up and you can see the jet stream. Have you ever seen a jet stream behind eagles? Say no, it'd be an eagle stream. Anyway, you don't, because they don't leave a trail. How about a snake on a rock? Do they leave a trail? How about a ship in the midst of the sea? Just for a short distance, you can see, but it eventually does what? Closes in and disappears. It says this is the way of an adulterous woman. You go back to verse 19, the way of a man with a virgin is claiming no harm. Come to verse 21 through 23. It says, for three things the earth is portobed. I'm struggling with that word. And I think this is the one that I looked. Yes, this word will help us. In the ESV, there are three things the earth trembles. You understand that better than that word?
Mine says quakes.
Yeah. So, trembles, quakes. Under four, he cannot bear. What are we talking about? The earth. And so it says, a servant, when he reigns, a fool when he is filled with food, a hateful woman when she is married, and a maid servant who succeeds her mistress. And so, 22, the slave, what's the problem with a slave becoming a king?
Because they kind of want to have revenge attitude to get the better of, like, I'll show you.
Yeah, that's right. But really, the overall theme that we're talking about sounds like a Disney movie, right? Where you become a king. But the thing is what we've seen from the Proverbs is a person in that position. Of course, these are rule of thumb. But if you are a slave with that mindset, and we understand Joseph was a slave, did he have a slave mindset? We're talking about the slave mindset, not the position, right? But the mindset. So keep that in mind. And so as Dad pointed out, when a overturn the cart because their mindset is not appropriate for the situation. Right? Okay. 24 through 28. There are four things which are little on the earth, but are exceedingly wise. The ant are people not strong, yet they prepare their food in the summer. The rock badgers are feeble folk, yet they make their homes in crags of the cliffs. The locusts have no king, yet they advance in rank. The spider skillfully grasps with his hand, and it is in the king's palace. And so there are four things which are little in the earth, but they are exceedingly wise. Why are they wise?
Well, they're successful in what they do.
They're successful. Why?
Part of it's their instinct.
What's that?
Part of it's their instinct.
Part is their instinct, but they what?
Learn from
They do. Right? They're constantly doing. And so because they're constantly doing, then that's the case. Okay. Any questions? We've got a few minutes left. 29. Maybe we should put their productivity slower. There are three things which are majestic in pace. Yes, four which are stately in walk. A lion which is mighty among beasts and does not turn away from any. A greyhound, a male goat also, and a king whose troops are with him. And so these three things which are majestic in pace. And what are they always doing? We talked about progression in the last. What's he telling his son to do? The lion does not turn away from what? What's he do? Don't turn away from me. Just goes forward. Right? A greyhound, a male goat also, and kings whose troops are with him. And so we're talking, I think what he's telling his son has is courage. Right? The courage to press forward. He's about to become a king, right? He's going to have to deal with some difficult situations. What was the first situation that we read about Solomon having after he was granted wisdom? What was the first situation he dealt with? Right? It would take courage to deal with that. Is it personal? Verse 32 and 33, we might actually do this. It says, if you have been foolish in exalting yourself, or if you have devised evil, put your hand on your mouth. For as the churning of milk produces butter, and the wringing the nose produces blood, so the force of wrath produces what? Okay. So, the whole chapter, as we're coming to the end of Proverbs, he's telling his son, be wise, be wise, be wise, be wise. Last two verses, he says, but if you have been what? Foolish, or have devised evil, put your mouth or your hand on your mouth. Okay. Why is that? Is it hard for us to share wisdom if we're not behaving wisely ourselves? He says, stop and do what? Fix it. Fix it. You've got to change. So, the forcing of wrath produces strife. And so we've got to stop. All right, any questions or comments? I hope we went through that adequately. I encourage you to keep studying. I think that might be the most difficult chapter. I'll introduce chapter 31 because we'll probably talk about the virtuous woman. And so we got just a couple minutes left. It says, the words of King Lemuel, the utterance which his mother taught him. I forgot to state that in verse 1 of chapter 30, is the name given here would be a name that, another name, alternate name for Solomon. Okay? So the words of King Lemuel, the utterance which his mother taught him. until chapter 31, who are we always pointing to as being the giver of wisdom?
Solomon.
We come to chapter 31, and who's pointed to as being wise?
Brother.
His mother. It says, the words of King Solomon, the utterance which is mom. Okay. Ask the question, who was his mother?
Bathsheba.
And honestly, a lot of times when we study about David and Bathsheba, where do we put Bathsheba at as far as a positive influence, a negative influence? Where's she at?
Should be a positive influence, but she was.
It wasn't in the beginning.
Uh,
Yeah, in the beginning it was.
She wasn't the problem.
we're not going to have time for this discussion. We're not going to
They
get
both
started.
had.
She wasn't the problem.
Okay.
It wasn't just, it takes two to do it.
Yes.
All right. So, the king, David, tells us, if we went back and looked at this, and we did this a long time ago when we started Proverbs, then he was not, the Bible alludes to the idea that he was not where he was supposed to be. Right? When he was at home when kings went to war. Right? So he wasn't with his people leading the fight. Right? So that's one problem. And then we talk about the second look, right? He was on the rooftop, and how many of us have noticed something that we ought not to? But it's the second glance that got him in trouble. You know, we've heard talk about that, right? Then we think about Bathsheba. She was in a position she probably ought not to have been, right? Okay. But if she was in a position she ought not to have been, and he looked once, and they went on with life, the Old Testament would be a lot different, right? But because David took that, and that what his thought sank into his heart, right? And it wasn't a good thought. Because of his power and authority as king, he felt that he had the right to have that, right? And so he pursued Bathsheba, okay? When she came to David, and we don't know, the Bible doesn't reveal, we don't want to make too many assumptions, but what was stated a minute ago was they both acted incorrectly, right? When she got there, if David says, these are your options, you can either die or not, what was her option? Right thing to do. She didn't do that. And the Old Testament law, and I didn't put the scriptures together because I wasn't prepared to talk to you about this, but if I remember right, if a woman was raped inside the city and she didn't scream for help, then she had to be put to death. Because by her not, lost the word, that long. Anyway, she didn't try to do anything about it, right? And so from what we understand, where this took place was inside the city. And so we understand this was consensual under the law of Moses, the terms of the law of Moses, right? Okay. So with that, they both sinned. But a lot of times we hold David on a pedestal when he had far more to do with the situation than she did, right? I believe that it was a difficult situation for her to be in, but she didn't. He didn't do things right. She didn't do things right. With all that being said, we know David to be a good man, a friend of God. What type of person was Bathsheba?
Verse 10.
What's that?
Verse 10.
Read chapter 31. Right. And so I believe verses 10 through 31 that Solomon was writing about his mom, what he saw in her mother. And when you read about the things that Bathsheba, if it weren't for Bathsheba, Solomon wouldn't have even been king because his brother went to take the throne. And she stood up. She was a strong woman, wasn't she? She was a strong woman. And she did great things. And David was probably a far better king because of her. But they had to repent what they did. What they did still wasn't right. But God used that situation. Two good people ended up having to repent and still did